Hey guys, I wanted to do a video about driving in the wet. And for that, I have put some data side by side. A wet lab, which will be represented by the white dot, and a dry lab, represented by the red dot. We're on Hungary in the McLaren, so what we drove yesterday. So I thought I used this experience while it's fresh to do a couple decent laps. Difference probably something like 10-12 seconds or so between the two, but I synced them based on position on track, so even the dots are carrying different speed, they will always be side by side in the visualized Motec data here. So let's go to the data. And rolling forward to turn 1, and then gonna stop right there once we get a glimpse of what is actually happening there. Probably this is a good position to do this. First, you can see the outside is always going to brake quite a bit earlier than the inside line there in the dry. Additionally, you should be able to see that just judging by the change of color, dark red indicating a lot of braking, bright red indicating, well, less braking, gray being the coasting area, and green being the throttle. You should be able to see that on the outside, the wet line is braking earlier, and then the whole trail braking phase is extended much longer, starts much earlier. And you can, especially in the end of the zone, you should be able to see that it's very, very careful going for the corner to transition the grip from longitudinal braking to lateral cornering. Everything has to be a lot smoother when it's wet because the tire can only take so much, and once you're over the limit of the tire, the car is just naturally going to lose the grip, and it's very hard to gain it back in the wet. Therefore, it's even more important to never go above the limit of the tire. Same is kind of true for the throttle application there. You'll see it kind of starts in the same position. There's not much of a difference there, but it's definitely more gentle, and it takes quite a long time to really reach maximum throttle at the end of the corner. There's more to say to this, but you can't see it in the data, which is that you always try to straighten up the car earlier in the wet scenario, just because the tires are not really willing to take more in having to do it laterally and longitudinally at the same time. You really want to make sure you do either or, and as little overlap of turning and accelerating as possible. Let's move forward through the corner and then go for turn 2, where the same pattern then will very likely just repeat itself. So you're starting the braking early. Let me stop it here for a second again. Braking starts earlier, trail braking phase starts earlier as well, much extended until the middle of the corner, where then the coasting phase pretty much ends at the same position, and also the line through the corner is more or less the same. Just again, everything is a lot more gentle. Throttle application then has, again, the same differences. Initially, both are a bit careful, but then you can see, especially in the transition here from going to the left, going to the right, that you have to take a lot more time on the accelerator on the wet line before you actually reach 100%. And also the right-hander isn't really flat out. You have to lift a bit because just accelerating through will put you too far to the outside of the track, where it's really slippery. And that's actually, as we roll forward, another major thing to recognize in the wet is just try to never use curbs on the exit unless the car is perfectly straight. Coming for the first, well, higher speed corner, same thing, braking earlier, trail braking a little deeper, more gentle on the throttle, and I think this pattern will now just repeat throughout the whole of the track. A long coasting phase here throughout this long right-hander, and then in the chicane, just everything, kind of this whole thing that I just explained is just going to be true in all of the corners ahead. Earlier braking, longer trail braking, more gentle transition from braking to cornering, and more gentle transition from cornering to full acceleration as well. Through the quick left-hander here, just a bit of lifting as well. Bit gentler on the brake there, a bit longer on the brake, a bit longer coasting, and more gentle on the throttle, straightening the car up a little earlier, because you also don't have as much track available in the wet when you're not allowed to use the curb. Coming to second to last corner, I think it's very pronounced here, so let's stop it there for a second as well. There's basically never full throttle applied, full braking applied here in the braking zone. It's always some form of trail braking because you're immediately turning into this corner, and there's not much grip left available for the tires to put the forces into the ground, which is why you have to be trail braking all the way into the corner. Then the coasting phase again looks rather similar on the throttle, also not too far apart in this corner. And then the last corner particularly have to be a lot more gentle. There's a huge coasting phase going into the corner and just losing speed very slowly through the applied turning angle until you can finally make it to a late apex in the corner and then start accelerating again. Let's take a look at the replay now still. So first, the replay in the dry. Coming to the first braking zone, you will be able to see full braking applied immediately for quite a while, turning in slightly under full braking, then trailing pretty much till the apex of the corner, using a lot of track on the exit, as you always do. And now for the second corner, turn in as soon as you hit the brakes and then have a first apex, go a bit wide, have a second apex there, wait till the car grips up, and then you can really pin the power down flat out through the right-hander. Again, use all the track the game allows you to use. And then for the first left-hander here, just a quick hard tap on the brake, tiny correction middle of the corner there. And for this long right-hander, there's a lot of patience kind of needed, because the front and rear alternatingly have grip. In the chicane as well, the McLaren rather deep to the ground, can't take as much curb as some of the other cars. Here though, the curb much easier to take, and just making sure in the S is where you want to carry that speed. And this is the short straight here up until the quick right-hander, so you want to sacrifice the corners of before a bit and just about have enough time to do the weight transfer here over to the right. Again, aggressive on the curbs. I think this is what you're going to have as your normal lap, always using the curb under braking in the corners on the exit. It kind of has enough grip in dry conditions. Here hard on the brake initially, but then long amount of trail braking, quite a bit of coasting, some sort of V'ing the corner with a double apex, and then into the last one, just letting the car lose speed quite late into the corner, come down or to the inside for a second late apex to keep the speed onto the main straight. Now if we go over to the wet section here, you can now see the braking definitely starts quite a bit earlier, and it's never reaching 100% because you always have to adjust. The conditions change a lot in the wet, and just trying to make the car as straight as possible as early as possible, because that's the only way the car will be able to put the power into the ground. Then here, never hitting the brake 100%, it's always some form of trail braking. While the line looks very similar, you just have to be a lot more gentle with it. Try to have as small of an oversteer as possible, ideally none at all, because this will cost you all the time. As soon as you have an oversteer, the traction control is gonna kick in and take away all the power from the engine. So yeah, your target really is to not have a lot of oversteer, because that is where the time is going to come away from you. Correct the oversteer quite quickly, as fast as you can, to straighten up the car again, because only then it will keep accelerating. Again, on the inside you can usually use the curbs, but on the outside, under braking, no acceleration, you should be doing so, because that tire just loses grip completely. Like 80-90% of it will be gone and the car is all snappy. Here just working with a tiny bit of oversteer to position the car to the outside, and then quite a bit of weighting needed then into the throttle to stabilize the car a bit, and then very, very gentle on the accelerator over the outside curb, where you need to make sure the car is almost straight or perfectly straight. Same here, going into the last corner, long trail braking, very gentle to reduce the speed there, and then having the car as straight as possible to be able to put the power into the ground. Longest coasting zone here on the whole of the track, and only once you notice the car will grip up, come to the inside again, you can start using the accelerator. Again, not using any curb on the outside. That is going to be the main difference here. Really not using the curbs on the braking on the outside, not using the curbs on acceleration on the outside unless the car is perfectly straight. In the corner on the inside, you can usually use the curbs if you're careful. Sometimes you need a bit of maintenance or stabilizing throttle there to stop the car from over rotating, and then make sure the car is as straight as possible for the exit when you really want to accelerate, because the car will only do so when the car really is straight. Now I just want to show the whole thing one more time in, well, Motec directly with what I usually do in the coaching. So first thing you can see, of course, the white line being the wet line is slower in every single place on the track, which just makes perfect sense, right? You accelerate later, so you're not going to have the same straight line speed. You brake earlier, so you're going to be slower towards the corner, and you don't have as much grip going into the corner, so mid-corner speed is going to be slower as well. This is perfectly normal. So zooming in on corner 1, then you can now see that the braking starts quite a bit earlier here from the white line. This is pretty much something 20 to 30 meters difference almost, which looks less on track, but given the speed you're carrying, it's only very little time that needs to pass really to cover a huge amount of distance, and that's why it looks a bit more severe here in the data than it might appear to you on track. Then you're also just, not for a long amount of time reaching full braking. Probably once you adapt to the conditions, this will look more towards the 100% there, but since when conditions are changing, it's quite difficult to do this adaptation. And the good way to do this is, in fact, on the brakes, because when you overshoot, you lose a lot of time. But it's much easier to brake a tiny bit earlier and then make adjustments throughout the braking zone to get your speed right through the corner, which is much more important than having the latest possible braking point. So yeah, braking will start earlier. The trail braking is going to be a bigger chunk of the overall braking compared to the dry line, even though where the braking stops is probably going to differ lap by lap. More or less where the braking stops is going to be the same. Also where the slowest speed in the corner is going to be is largely going to be the same. Then on throttle application, I think there's some difference that we can as well see. While in the dry, you are more or less capable of just slamming the throttle into the floor, here indicated by the red line coming up rather quickly. But in the dry, there's just not the grip available. You need to give the car more time to build the grip and especially straighten up the car. And that is the second thing you're likely going to see down here in the steering column. While you're going into the corner, sometimes does make sense to have a bit more turning angle applied in the wet, because that puts the car in a slightly understeery state, which makes it more stable, more predictable, easier to get rid of the excess speed without the rear stepping out. So sometimes you'll see a larger turning angle there. But then on the exit, as I said, you want to make sure the car is straightened up earlier quite quickly, so only then the car will be able to turn your acceleration input into actual acceleration when the car is straight. You need to open up on the steering a lot earlier and straighten up the car there. So your focus in the back of the head should be, let's put the apex just a tiny bit later. Let's make sure the car is a little more straight so I don't have to do as much rotation on the throttle, because the car simply cannot take it. And this is the pattern that you're likely going to see in the wet. More gentle throttle application, steering wheel open up earlier, indicating the car is already straightened up a bit earlier for the car to be able to put it into the ground as well. Then going for corner 2, same pattern is going to repeat. Earlier braking zone, whole of the braking zone is actually trail braking, very gentle on the steering there. There little correction already needed here for the rear end stepping out, so needs this correction in line with the correction in the steering trace. You can see there's a correction on the brake as well, being a bit more easy, allowing the front or allowing the car to keep the speed a little longer, go away from the oversteer back into the understeer zone. And once you see the oversteer stops, I commit to the steering again. I also commit to the brakes one more time to keep slowing down the car. Then very long and deep trail braking into the corner, similar to the dry, just everything a bit more pronounced and extended. Same maximum turning angle in the middle of the corner really, and also the line throughout the corner. Some sort of V double apex approach here, a throttle application at the same point, also going up to the same level initially there. So there isn't a huge difference in that, but the difference then comes in here, where I just have to wait a lot longer until I put down the power completely. And at the same time, you can see just the steering angle there, being very cautious in line with the throttle input that I have. So once I go full throttle, I know the rear is going to step out. You can see there the oversteer immediately is coming, and then very shallow steering inputs into the right hander here, because the rear is really loose. Then going out of the throttle to just keep the balance in the car somewhat alive, being really careful is the main thing you want to keep in mind here. And then making sure the car is almost straight before I run wide onto the exit curb there, exit of turn 3, the flat out in the dry, flat out right-hander before you go up the hill. Then bit of oversteer there on the green stuff, which is fine to some degree, but you'll immediately notice once you have a delta where you didn't need to oversteer, every time you've come to the situation where you have to correct it, traction control is going to kick in. You can see it down here. Traction control is working all the time, especially when the oversteer is happening, of course. That will always cost you a lot of time and kind of doesn't allow you to build the speed for the straight. Coming then to the first really quick corner with a braking zone ahead, you also can see never braking fully, because once you go into the ABS, you lose all cornering capacity in the rain. Have to be really careful there. Gentle with the steering inputs, trail braking, again, up to the same point in the middle of the corner. A tiny extra throttle input here, middle of the corner to stabilize the car. The rear might have been stepping out a bit. In the rain, just more correction generally is allowed, but just be gentle with everything you do. Then the turning angle, really, really steady. You don't upset the car too much. Going into the power then, initially quite a lot, but then you immediately have to go back because the car is still rotating. You can still see turning angle applied and really have to wait with full power until here, when I decided, okay, this is enough turning. I've made the corner. I stayed away from the outside curb. The car's now straight and I can put the power down. The oversteer immediately follows, but you know, not being on the curb, car almost straight, I can live with that. Then bringing the car over to the left side of the road there for the entry of the very long uphill right-hander where Alonso famously passed Schumacher around the outside in the rain with a insane turning angle on his Renault. Anyway, braking here, simply because I don't have that much speed, difference being 25 kilometers there for the next braking point, I can actually be braking at the same point, but you see I'm again very, very gentle on the throttle braking input there to not upset the car too much, not inflict too much pitch in the car, not make the rear too loose. And then there's a fair bit amount of coasting going on middle of the corner with rather steady turning angle, just waiting for the car to lose some excess speed deeper into the corner. And then throttle application for both wet and dry, actually rather similar here. Taking your time to put it down. You can see traction control is working all the way here in the dry and in the wet, caused by the bumpy road there to some degree. And then making sure again in the wet to not go too wide on the outside curb, actually not go onto the curb at all. Keep it all the time within the white lines. That's your best shot at being able to put the power into the tarmac. Few corrections here with the oversteer, just part of the game in the wet. Not too much to be concerned there. Braking for the chicane then, again, a bit earlier, because speed is much more similar now coming to this braking zone. So in the wet, naturally, you have to brake a bit earlier to reduce the speed more for the corner. Trail braking much more pronounced again. Here I work a bit with a larger, more aggressive turning angle to force the car into some sort of understeer over the curb, because the curb usually upsets the car, inflicts additional rotation. We don't want that, so I'm working against it with the turning angle. Throttle application rather similar, going through the left-hander, but as soon as the power is down, you can see the rear snaps away from me, and I have to make a really quick correction to stop the oversteer right in its tracks, basically, before it gets too severe, because then I get quite a big amount of time loss there. So it's really vital to make quick corrections and then be very, very gentle as soon as you put the power down. Make sure the car is straight, as I've said a couple of times before. Coming to the S's then, looking at the steering traces, it's more or less similar, right? Same turning angles, same start of turn in. Just again, the braking will be a bit earlier, will be a bit gentler, a bit deeper into the corner. And then just waiting for the car to go over the curb, have a very steady turning angle there, maybe slightly forcing the understeer into the car with a bit of too much steering. Then gentle on the throttle initially. This is more to stabilize the car, lock the differential. And then once the car is straight, or you feel this is as straight as you need to be to put the power down, well, you do so. You see I was a bit early initially. Immediately the oversteer coming in there, correcting that as quickly as you can, as you always do, so the car is straight, can put the power into the ground, and you have some time to position the car before the right-hander appears, where then, because I don't build speed, just a very tiny brake input there, and just let the car roll a bit and try to make tiny adjustments throughout the corner. In this case, it's even on the throttle to make sure the car position is kind of matching where you want to be, with a rather 8 apex through the right-hander here before you're coming onto the short, well, not really a straight, but flat out zone before having to brake again for the quick right-hander. In the wet then, main difference through the quick left-hander that is flat out. In the dry, you definitely need to manage throttle in the wet here, and this is the medium rain preset. So in most cases you will need to do this too. Probably some cars won't need it, probably some setups won't need it, but here definitely I needed to be gentle on the throttle through the left-hander because the rear was just stepping out all the time. As soon as I did the turn in here, rear stepping out, grips up again, I turn in, loses grip, have to counter steer, have to commit to the corner once more, then backing out of the throttle to control the rear end of the car. Again, an oversteer moment coming there, but the all-important thing is to really get the car over to the left side to have a nice entry position for the fast right-hander, where you'll see then the braking, again, more gentle, not as peaky, starting a little earlier, going a little deeper into the corner, and then a long coasting phase through the corner to just work off that additional speed. Don't do too much to the car, just don't upset it. That's basically your target in the wet. And then just do the car, let it do its thing. Back on the throttle, you can see pretty much the same position there, but then have to be much more cautious, much more patient in the wet scenario, while also having less turning angle applied already, which means the car should be more straightened by the time you go into full power here. That's the whole waiting game. If you had turning a lot and you put the power down completely in the wet, either the rear is going to step out, or you're going to have severe understeer, or the traction control cuts in so massively that you're not building any speed. That's the whole idea here. Then coming to the last section on the track, last 3 corners, I think we should be seeing the same pattern as in the first 2 corners. Earlier braking point, more pronounced trail braking phase, while the phases, or where the places where you stop the braking, are very similar. Turning angle also not too far apart between dry and wet line, but just generally the wet line has to open the steering earlier. You have to be straight earlier for the power to go into the ground, and then also a harsh throttle application isn't a thing when the car is already straightened or almost straight at the point of throttle application. Then second to last corner, think very, very pronounced, very subtle trail braking here, very deep into the corner, much earlier in the dry scenario, because you are already turning in from here, right? So you're cornering before you're even hitting the brake, which means there's less grip available for additional braking because the front tire is already being used to rotate the car. So you have to be more gentle. And despite this little input here, the ABS immediately coming up, trying to help you around the corner, keeping the grip on the front tires going. So very gentle, very deep and long trail braking into the corner. Steering angle, very similar progression as in the dry, not much of a difference here. Throttle application initially in the same spot as well. Also some sort of double apex in the second to last corner here. And then I think more gentleness on the throttle in general, also opening up the steering earlier, just because you can't use that exit curb, you just have to get more rotation done earlier, so more pronounced V-shape might even make sense in those long 180-degree corners here. And then the last corner is, well, it's a horrible corner in the dry already, even more so in the wet, so you have to be a lot more gentle than in the dry, especially when you have a hybrid setup that's already loose in the dry and is going to be even more loose in the wet. So very little turning angles applied here initially. As soon as I hit the brake, you can see the rear is now stepping out. I have to do the counter steer. Then the counter steer is corrected. I can go into the brake again to keep reducing the speed through the corner. And then there's this huge coasting phase here in the drive with a very steady turning angle. Just let the car work off its excess speed very deep into the corner, and then once you've reduced the speed up until this point, you will feel the front tire now gripping up the cars, now coming towards the inside of the track again, close to the curb, and this is the place where you usually want to start applying the throttle. And same pattern as everywhere, point is rather similar, but then I take a lot longer time to go into the throttle completely, just because you have to wait for the car to straighten up, else the TC cuts it away or the rear brakes traction. Same pattern then in the steering trace as well. You just have to make sure the car is straight to be able to accelerate. And then we are already through a lap, and I'm really hoping I was able to tell you a bit about how the differences in the driving or in the, well, driving inputs that you're doing would look in the wet. I'll leave it at that. Wish you a nice weekend and good start to the next week. Have a good one. Bye-bye.